Perfect. Okay, well, could you take this slide down, please, for the time being?
Yep. Stop sharing. Okay. Yep.
There we go. Great. All right. So welcome. I'm Dr. Arlen Myers. I'm President and CEO of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. And this is another webinar that we periodically offer. This one is sponsored by what we're calling the SoPE by Southwest group, which is basically a consortium of SoPE chapters between Colorado, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and Nevada. And I'm privileged and pleased to have Cassia Hine-Peters, who is in Nevada. So she's in Las Vegas. So thanks again, Cassia. Welcome.
My pleasure to be here today.
Yeah. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Definitely. So I'm a physician, and I did residency in psychiatry, both in Poland many years ago. Quite early in my career, I decided that I did not want to be a clinical physician anymore. I decided for a career, an alternative career in the industry. So I have spent more than 25 years in pharmaceutical, biotechnology, medical device industries, and recently became an independent consultant, advisor, board member, and investor. So over the years, I spent a lot of time introducing new products to the market. So as you can imagine, every company that I worked for had their own way of doing things. But over the years, I developed a way that I will present to you today, which is, in my opinion, one of the most thorough ways of actually looking at a new launch and commercialization of new products, which I think members of the society can benefit from, because that's what we do. We are entrepreneurs and want our inventions to become true innovations.
Mm-hmm. So let me just do a little housekeeping, and that is, if you have a question, put it in the chat, or raise your hand, or jump up and down, or do something on the screen so I can get your attention. And then we can interrupt, or whatever Cassia feels comfortable doing, wait to the end. Yep. But generally, I like to kind of field the questions when they pop up, so we get them answered before we run out of time.
Oh, if that's okay,
that's okay
that's
with you.
Perfectly fine. Yeah.
Okay. So
we can do it in a very interactive manner.
Yeah. So Cassia, take it away.
All right. So I'm sorry. Share screen. And this is the slide deck. So we could start. I actually have 2 slides prepared to introduce the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. So I don't know, Arlene, maybe you would like to talk a little bit about the society first.
Sure. So we are a nonprofit global, as it says, global and biomedical and healthcare innovation and entrepreneurship network. We're an open innovation network, so anybody can join. You don't have to be a healthcare professional. I tell people that if it were only for doctors, it would be the blind leading the blind. So we really need an open network, and I don't believe that sick care can be fixed from inside. So it has to be an inside out, outside in sort of open innovation pathway, which is what we've been building over the years. We're a not-for-profit. We were founded in 2011, and I can share that creation story if we have time. But fundamentally, our mission is to help our members get their ideas to patients. And we provide education, resources, networks, mentors, experience, peer support, and non-clinical career guidance to members in our network, which is an international global network with chapters all over the world. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
All right. So today, the presentation that I have for you and the discussion that we'll have today is about really moving from invention to innovation. And the only one objective of the presentation is to help all of us to develop successful strategies for innovations in healthcare. So very much aligned with the society goals and objectives. And I think that what we could start with is actually to think about what is invention versus innovation. Because this is a quite important distinction, and all of us probably have great ideas who become inventions, but the innovation is only when the invention is actually used. So invention is something new, something that has not been created before, but only the use of new idea, technology, service, of method is actually an innovation. And what happens in the process is that the value is created, the value for customers and the value for the company. So why inventions do not become innovations? Actually, it's very frequent. In the technology sector, it is said, it is believed that 90% of inventions actually never make it to the market, or even if they make it to the market, they are not successful. The main reasons are usually related to basically no value provided for customers, lack of relevancy. Sometimes an invention may be too premature, the ecosystem is not yet ready. It may be due to also lack of funding for the company, inability to talk about, to present benefits of the innovation, and many others. But that's why every company needs a strategy. And the strategy is really a set of choices that create sustainable advantage, both in the market, but also financial advantages for the company. And as you can imagine, as I said before, every company has their way of doing things. But so what I'm presenting today is one of the many ways of developing a strategy. It is a very thorough way. And I believe that even with other frameworks, some of the same questions have to be answered in order to create a value for your innovations. And this is really, it's called 5 essential strategy questions, or a strategy cascade. It basically has 5 kind of big buckets of questions. One is, what is our winning aspiration? The second one is, where will we play? How will we win? How will we execute? And what capabilities and systems are required? It is based on a book called The Play to Win, and the work done by a consultant whose name is Roger Martin. But he introduced it in the customer industry. So I will show you how this choice cascade can be adapted for healthcare innovation.
Kessia,
Yes,
this is Sri. Can I chime in with a question?
absolutely.
How do you know you have an invention on your hands? How do you know whatever it is that you're thinking about is actually new? How do you confirm that? It's a very
Well,
basic and fundamental question, but every time somebody comes up with something, they feel like they have something new. So how do you know that what you're thinking about is worthwhile, it's new, it's ready to go from invention to innovation? How do you decide that?
So I think knowing that something is new, again, in my experience, I would do a very thorough market analysis and basically look into clinical trial databases, look into some IP, trademark and patent databases. And this way, it is a very, sometimes very lengthy process. And again, many companies have even some special departments that look into those databases to actually find out if something is new. I think most companies that I worked for, we would do a very thorough patent analysis to find out if what we have is really new.
Yeah, if I could chime in, there's a difference between an idea, an invention, an improvement, and an innovation, which we're getting to. An idea is something that's stuck in your head, never sees the light of day. An invention is an idea that's reduced to practice. Now, and then an improvement and an innovation we'll discuss in a few minutes. But the point is that if you think you have something new or, quote, an invention, you probably don't. It's that old saying, there's nothing new under the sun. So in order to determine whether, in fact, you have an intellectual property protected something, you need to do some due diligence and figure it out. The 2 easiest ways to do it are Google Patent, which is available by Google, that's free. And you go to uspto.gov, and they have a tremendous website that basically has all the patents in the United States. Now, these patents are country specific. So if you're in another country, it's a different story, but I'm talking about people in the United States. So the short answer is we could have a whole webinar, and in fact, we do on intellectual property on our SoPE YouTube station. But if you're interested, the bottom line is start by searching US. Could you please mute your video, your audio? Thanks. If you go to uspto.gov or you go to Google Patent and start there. Okay.
Sri,
go
do
ahead.
you have more questions about that?
Are you okay with that, Sri?
Yeah, Arlen and Kaisia, thank you so much. I just
Right.
want to get some conversation going, basically.
Sure. So somebody asked a question, means it's the business model is, and we can talk about what's a business model, but I'm just going to assume you know that right now. And if you don't, we'll answer it. It's viable, it's automatic, it's scalable, and it's time sensitive.
Cook County scavenger sale.
And again, we can talk some more about that if you want to. Okay, go ahead, Cassie.
All right. So what we typically start with is, or what I typically started with in my work was to define the winning aspiration, which is very close to what you typically would call a mission and vision, but usually a little bit more competitive. Now, in order to define a winning aspiration, you really need to know your market well. And it starts with the market definition, understanding what is the market condition. Is it stable, growing, declining? What is the unmet need, maybe medical need or another need in the healthcare system? Analysis of the stakeholders. As you know, this is a very complex group of influencers and decision makers in our healthcare ecosystem. Understanding the regulatory context, again, maybe only in the US, maybe internationally, reimbursement and funding, who are the competitors, also any alternative therapies, barriers to entry, and finally, the company or the product SWOT. And then considering all of the above, the winning aspiration can be defined. What's important is that many companies, again, as I said, many companies have missions and visions, which are sometimes a little high level, maybe not concrete enough. Many companies also have financial goals. So there's obviously, it's necessary to have a financial goal, but a winning aspiration is something a little bit broader. It puts the financial goals into the context. Now, not only business organizations have winning aspirations. I'd like to show you an example just to illustrate what it really is based on SoPE. SoPE has a vision which actually sounds very much like a winning aspiration. So here the two are practically identical. The SoPE's vision is to be the premier physician entrepreneurship resource in the world, and it does have all the necessary elements of the winning aspiration. First of all, it has the ambition to be a premier resource. It has a clear target audience, physician entrepreneurs, but also other entrepreneurs in the healthcare system. And then the target is the world. So it does have all the elements of competitive and ambitious winning aspiration. And the belief is that without an ambitious and competitive winning aspiration, a company may not be able to make all the necessary hard choices that needs to be made to achieve this goal. So that's why it's very important to establish this at the very beginning.
I would only comment that creating a mission statement, I mean, we've all been through this rigmarole, vision, mission, values, all that business. I will tell you that it took SoPE 11 years to become famous overnight. This is not something that you get in a room and you figure it out, and then you're good to go, and that's it. It takes a while to figure this out. And it really has to do with testing business ideas as much as testing the vision. So don't think this is easy. It is not. It's going to take you a while to get the right words, as few words as possible, so that someone with a 5th grade education can understand it.
Yeah, definitely. And
I
think
I have a quick question on this one too. If you have a winning aspiration, but you have multiple paths to market, how do you determine which one is the first approach that you should take?
So what again, I'm speaking from my experience. How I typically approach that was that the company has typically a winning aspiration as a company, and then each path which you may say each product, each portfolio, each franchise, each business unit have their goals underneath that are aligned with the winning aspiration of the company, but are very specific for the given business unit, path forward, product portfolio, however you have your company organized. Does it make sense?
Yes, thank you.
So, and I also would like to add to this notion that even though I am presenting this as a linear process because of the PowerPoint slides and the structure that they require, it is in fact not a linear process. You are usually going back and forth between these different steps through the choice cascade, because the answers that you develop at the next step, they may inform your previous step as well as they can inform your next step. So it is actually not, it is an iterative process where you kind of go back and forth. So a very important aspect of the strategy is to decide where will we play. And this is because there is no company in the world that has resources to play everywhere and to target every market segment. So in order to choose the market segments properly, the market segment is either an institutional segment, maybe the type of healthcare institution. It may be, what I call a target audience, which is a people segment. For example, a specific specialty among doctors or other type of healthcare professionals like nurses or maybe payers. In order to do that, there are a couple of questions that needs to be answered, and these are the main questions. So what are the decision-making processes in our market? Are we focusing right now on the regulatory path, or already reimbursement, or maybe clinical decision-making, or maybe buying processes, or maybe all of the above? Now, for each of these decision-making processes, once they are mapped, you also map the decision makers and influencers, and these then become your target segments or target audiences. You need to understand their behaviors, why they have certain behaviors, why they prescribe certain drugs or decide to perform certain procedures, and then think about which behaviors you can actually change in order to get your product adopted in the market. And based on that, you then decide which groups you target, what geographic areas make sense for you, and this is based on the potential of the market, the ability to win in this particular marketplace, basically based on your company ability, but also your market conditions. And I think the classical mistake that I see people doing here is to only look at market potential and choose segments that have the highest market potential, which, on the surface makes sense. But I think underneath there is a very, very important aspect of, is the company able to win in this market segment? And this is then related not only to the product itself, but also the company abilities, capabilities. And we will talk about it a little bit later, because not every company has an ability to win in every particular market segment.
I would add that not only does not every company have the ability to win, but every person doesn't have the ability to win. So if you are a physician entrepreneur or someone looking, so the question is, well, how do I know where to play, given everything that's just been said? And one piece of advice I would give you is what I call make it personal, but don't take it personally. This is so hard to do that if you don't have something that is driving you to do this, don't do it. I don't care how big the market opportunity is. If you are not built to do this, whether it's an experience you had, whether it's a personal circumstance, whether it's something that you just happened to you, if you are not driven to do this, that is, you make it personal. My advice is don't chase that objective. It's not going to work, particularly if you're just doing it for money, and particularly if somebody else thinks it's a good idea, but you're really not sure. So that's just one small piece of advice. It really has to do with personal reflection. You start off with, what problem, what itch do I have that I want to scratch so bad that I am willing to put all this time and effort into it to make it work?
Thank you. That's very important. And even in case of companies, if people in the company don't feel a passion for what they do, it's the same. They cannot really do a good job because it does require a lot of reflection at the individual and company level. So the next very important aspect is how do we actually win? So let's say we already selected a market segment. We know where we want to play. But what is our value proposition for this particular market segment or a target audience? And the value proposition, interestingly, we sometimes think about it as a product value proposition, but the value proposition is different for different audiences. You may have a clinical value proposition for your clinical audiences, but also economical value proposition for your payers. There may be also value propositions related to process efficiencies and other aspects of the healthcare ecosystem. But it is not uncommon to have different value propositions for different target audiences. That's also one of the reasons, very practical reasons, why you cannot have too many target audiences, because then you have to develop multiple value propositions. And I remember one company where I used to work that started with 15 target segments. So now imagine developing 15 value propositions, developing 15 messages platform for these different customer groups. And this is just not sustainable. So the ability to make a choice and say no to certain market segments is incredibly important. And I think that once we have the value proposition and related to this understanding of our customer personas and messaging platforms, then we can move to the next step, which is how do we actually execute? And I think these three aspects, where to play, how to win, and how to execute, these actually create the core of the strategy. How will we execute is really your tactical plan, where you decide many very important aspects of your product or service. This is the place where we need to decide the price. We need to decide our communication strategy. So, and in case of healthcare, comes down to some journals and magazines where we want to publish our study results, what conferences we want to attend. Do we need to use social media channels to communicate with our audiences? And if yes, which one? Are there any other things, any other activities, any other programs that we need to do that will drive our product? And again, an example might be, if you still have any data gaps after the launch of the product, you may decide that one of your big activities and programs for your product is investigator-initiated studies. But if you happen to be in a situation when you think that your data gaps have been fulfilled mostly by your R&D program, then maybe you don't need to invest in any additional scientific grants in the post-marketing situation. This is also the place when we decide the budget and how do we allocate the budget per activities and programs. And last but not least, what metrics are the best to track implementation and success. And here, maybe one point I'd like to make about the metrics is that I am a strong believer that only things that you measure actually happen. But I'm also a strong believer that metrics cannot be, metrics have to be very well designed, not only to assess if you implemented your tactical plan, which is implementation metrics, but also if you actually changed behaviors that you wanted to change and you decided that you need to change at one of the previous stages. And finally, obviously, if you achieved your financial objectives. So basically, KPIs are divided between implementation, strategic, and financial KPIs. And financial KPIs are your lagging indicators. They come as the last step. So you need to have enough leading indicators that your plan has been implemented properly and is actually making the changes that you wanted to make before you actually start tracking sales. So, and what's next? I think this is also the last but not least aspect of designing a strategy is really to think very thoroughly about capabilities and systems that are required in your company. And again, if you talk about smaller companies, we talk about startups, very frequently people who are within a startup, they have certain competencies. And initially, very frequently, these are scientists who do the discovery part of the research and then research and development. So the question is, as you move forward with your product, you start needing some other capabilities. And then the question, regulatory, commercialization, communication, etc. So then you need to decide which of these competencies you recruit, which of these competencies you outsource. And I mean, outsourcing can go as far as outsourcing your manufacturing, obviously outsourcing clinical trials, sometimes even outsourcing your sales team. So all these must be thought through and decided. And here also you decide about your processes. Very important aspect of the governance and management practices. So how do you manage the company? What kind of meetings you have? How do you communicate and develop the strategy? Your quality, IT systems, raising capital, managing risk is all part of this last but not least aspect of the strategy development. And as I said before, sometimes what you realize at this stage is that you actually are not able to raise as much capital as you wanted, and therefore you cannot necessarily implement the entire tactical plan as you wanted. So you basically go back, and based on your company capabilities and financing, you may have to revise your previous steps of the strategy just to be realistic. So how do you put it all together? Because I think now we've answered all sorts of questions, and you can imagine that answering these questions may take hundreds and hundreds of pages if you really want to go deep and answer them thoroughly. However, each step of this process has specific outputs. And again, outputs are very flexible. In my experience, I usually use the ones that I show on the slide, but they can be different depending what is the output for your company and for you personally of this particular step. So the winning aspiration, which comes from your market analysis, usually has market definition, situation analysis, SWOT, and finally the winning aspiration combined with your financial results. Does someone want to ask a question? If not, maybe please mute yourself, because we hear a little bit of a background noise sometimes. So moving forward, where to play usually has the following outputs: mapping the decision-making processes and target behaviors, your market map with target segments, and customer personas with drivers and barriers. Which then leads you to how to win, where you decide your target product profile, or in case of some digital products, minimum viable product. You decide your positioning, value proposition, and message platform. And then in how to execute, you really your output is the integrated cross-functional plan and KPIs. And then your last step leads to, having an output here is the talent management, preferred vendors, managerial processes, SoPs, and everything that kind of constitutes the working of the company. So I will maybe stay on this slide for a moment and ask if there are any questions. But I want to say that if this process is done right, and you basically end up with a presentation that's less than 20 slides, that basically describes your strategy. It can be even more concise, and you can even do it in less than 10 slides if you wish. But I think having all these answers leads to a very concise a presentation that tells a good story that can be presented internally in the company, can be presented to investors. So I think these are, again, that's why I said that the process itself leads to a very kind of a nice story that tells how your company plans to win and by doing what specifically in the marketplace. Any specific questions? Because that's really we are reaching the end of the presentation, and I'm curious if there are any questions that we should answer at this stage.
Kezia, this is Sri again. Again, a very fundamental question based on this slide. So obviously all of these components are important if you want to get somewhere. Mm-hmm. But just based on this slide, it seems like where to play is the most important component in some sense.
I think it's the most difficult, probably. And that's why it's, I think the reason why it's built into 3 important steps is because, again, based on my experience and the companies that I worked for, typically people have the biggest problem with defining where to play for multiple reasons. One is that the work behind this decision is maybe not as thorough as it should be, and especially the work related to mapping decision-making processes. If we do not understand really well decision-making processes that happen in our space, we cannot define segments. And that's what happens, you know, when people then decide that they have 15 target segments. That's the example that I was giving through my presentation. One of the companies where I worked for, when I joined the team, I found out that they had 15 target market segments, which is unsustainable. Why? Because they didn't do the proper work with decision-making processes. And then finally, what's very important is to have customer personas, because they really inform how to win aspect. So that's why, maybe because it's the most difficult process, and it's very difficult for people also to say no to certain segments that may appear attractive. So that's maybe why this part of the strategy building is has three buckets instead of just one.
Thank you, Keshav.
Again, this question of where to play is a personal decision, but it's also a market-driven decision. And it really brings up the point that initially you need to be a problem seeker, not a problem solver. The hardest part of this is figuring out where to play. And in terms of digital, like in our field, is it drugs? Is it devices? Is it diagnostics? Is it digital therapeutics? Is it med ed tech? Is it care delivery? I mean, this is a big ocean. And so you have to pick your spot. And then once you pick your spot, then you have to sub-segment it, because it's so complicated within every spot. So it really takes a lot of research, analysis, personal introspection, resources, the whole deal, to figure out whose problem are you trying to solve and how.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of people just say, well, they have a solution looking for a problem, and so they do it bass backwards. You got to start with the problem, not with your solution.
Yeah, I think in principle, how some marketers call it is to be not to be product centric in this process, but be more people centric and problem centric.
Right.
And develop your strategy from understanding of the problems of real people. These real people just happen to work in healthcare, and that's why we are here, and that's how we are trying to adjust this process for the healthcare situation. But these are real problems of real people, and that's what needs to be understood at a very, very deep level.
Yeah. So if you could take this slide down, and let's go back to the.
I have two more slides, actually.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
So let me just finish, and a few other considerations when you build such a plan. One I already mentioned, it's really not a linear, but an iterative and continuous process. It's very important that this plan doesn't sit on a shelf somewhere in the office once it's presented to investors. There has to be a process, and this is part of the managerial processes in the company. There has to be a process once something important happens in the market, maybe related to a competition, maybe related to study results, however you define an important event, but an important event should be able to trigger a revision of the strategy. If there is no important event, at least a revision of the strategy should be done once a year. The second important point is what I call don't outsource your eyes. So first of all, we all know that we need to rely on a deep market knowledge, but try to see this market with your own eyes. Try to do as much observations in real life, shadowing real people, talking with important stakeholders as you can, as opposed to relying only on white papers, industry reports, or even market research based on surveys. The third point is that make sure, and I think that the last 2 points kind of go together, make sure that your strategy is really communicated broadly in the organization and really understood at every level, because almost everybody in the company is making strategic decisions. For example, a low-level marketer who is making a decision about the communication channels must fully understand the strategy, otherwise he may not choose the right channels. So it's something that sounds and seem to some of us very tactical. It's actually a strategic decision as well. And instead of conclusions, I just have three quotes that resonate with me, and I think they're important for everyone who is trying to launch any innovation, not only in the healthcare space. But one is, and it comes back maybe to what is a real invention. A real invention is when you see what everyone else has seen, but you think about it differently. I think this is when a real invention and then innovation happens. The second point is great entrepreneurs don't have better ideas, they have better processes. And that's why we spend so much time on talking about the process today. And finally, the essence of strategy is choosing what not to do. And I think that's also very important and very difficult, because we are all by nature a little opportunistic and just want to chase the next shining object. So I will now take my slides down and gosh, sorry. Stop share. Okay.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, so why don't we open this conversation up, whether you want to share some ideas or whether you want to tell us about your failures or ask questions or whatever it is you have in mind. Raise your hand, unmute your mic, chime in, let us know. Zachary, you had a question before. Did you get it answered?
Yes, I did. I actually had an additional question. I'm thinking about the best way to phrase it. But when you're developing your business model canvas and your subsequent revenue models and pro formas, how do you make sure that you're not smoking your own dope and like these revenue models actually make sense, like the costs, the expenses, and what you actually think that you can generate for revenue? Because everyone thinks they're going to be the 100 million or $1 billion company. How are you accurate with your estimations?
Right. So the short answer is you test your business ideas. Mm-hmm. So you're in the business model canvas, you are going to be putting in your underlying hypotheses. And for those of you who are not familiar with that process, there's several books that are sort of being passed around these days that walk you through this. This is a fairly, this is a 15-week session, course, how to do this. But the short answer is, when you look at the revenues, so you're going to put together a pro forma P&L, profit and loss statement. First of all, you need to understand what a profit and loss statement is and what's in it. But you could just YouTube that, how to create a profit and loss statement. So basically, you're going to test your underlying assumptions. For example, we're going to price an object that we want to sell at $5, and we think we can sell 10 of them. And so we're thinking our revenue is going to be 5 times 10, and let's just say that's your monthly recurrent revenue, referred to as MRR. So your assumption is we're going to sell 10 gadgets for $5. So the revenue in the P&L for the month is going to be $50. The cost of goods sold, then let's say it's a gadget. So whatever it costs to make that gadget, let's just pick a number, it's $5. So now 50% of the revenue is the cost of goods sold. So the gross profit is $50. Let's just stop there. The P&L goes much beyond that. You have to verify and validate that assumption, A, that people are willing and able to buy that for $5, and B, that it's going to cost you $5 to make it. Because now you get into supply chain issues, source of materials, exchange, currency exchange risk, you name it. And you might find out that, guess what? People are only willing to pay, if at all, $2.50. But it's going to cost us $7 to make it. You can't make it up in volume. Mm-hmm. So the short answer is test your business ideas.
I would say also that I've seen many times really overblown forecasts to be one of the main reasons of failure. Because even though a product may be doing reasonably well in the market, because the forecast was not met, everybody thinks that it failed. And I think that speaking with your stakeholders is a must, and understanding whatever, if they want the product and at what price. I also would like to caution against thinking that the adoption will be fast. In the healthcare market in general, there are many barriers to entry, regulatory and reimbursement being probably the biggest initially, but also funding at the hospital level, hospital formularies, etc. So sometimes the forecast assumes the sales will come too soon, considering these barriers. Giving yourself time to overcome these barriers is very important. And then another thing I'd like to also caution against is that when you talk with people and they say they will do something, only 50% of them at most will actually do it, because people notoriously don't do what they say they will. So a classical mistake is to say, oh, 50% of my target audience said that they will buy it, so I put this number into my forecast. Don't put more than 25% if 50% says that they will buy it.
Adam Dakin, are you with us?
As a matter of fact, I am. How are
Hi,
you guys
Adam.
doing?
Yeah, thanks
Nice
for
to see you,
joining
Aaron.
us.
How you doing?
Good.
Yeah, no,
Yes.
appreciate
Thanks for joining us. So you're pretty deep in the weeds and you've been through this over and over and over and over. So tell people who you are, what you do, and your response to what you're talking about.
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it. So Adam Dakin, nice to meet all of you. I'm a partner with Dream Ventures, Philadelphia-based venture fund. Our primary focus is health tech, and what I mean by that are digital platforms, digital health, and medical devices. We don't stray sort of beyond those two sub-verticals very much, if you will. Our target is late seed, Series A companies. We're a $50 million fund, raising our fourth fund now, be a little bit bigger, but typical check sizes between $750 and $1 million. And the way we're different from other funds is we have a network now of about 100 partners, predominantly enterprise healthcare systems, where we get red carpet access to see the C-level executives in those organizations, all with the unabashed mission of accelerating commercial relationships, getting our companies to the front of the line in those systems, if you will. And that network also includes several payers and plans, several big pharma partners, several integrated delivery networks as well. And then we also have a network now. It's about 1,300 venture funds that we reach out to for our companies. We don't lead rounds. We just co-invest with other funds, but we work like mad to help those startups find lead investors so that we get the opportunity to co-invest into those deals on the same terms and conditions as everybody else, but we get to know our companies quite well through this process that I just described.
Good. So I put your link in the chat. So if people want to get in touch with you, they can. You have a pitch fest. You got all kinds of stuff. So so thanks for doing that. You're doing a really good job. Based on what you just heard, so from the vetting and sort of the idea vetting, because you're going to get like 1 million people sending you stuff, like, you get all these proposals and pitch decks and whatever. So based on your perspective as an ecosystem / funding method, what are the 2 or 3 biggest mistakes that people make when they're trying to figure out how to get an idea to a patient based on this presentation?
Yeah, I think you guys touched on it, and without question, it is the problem statement, right? If you don't get the problem statement right, if we don't believe the problem statement, nothing else matters. Like, I don't care how great your solution is, I don't care how big your market is, I don't care how great your team is. Our sort of admitted unscientific assessment is that 50% of companies fail because they're not solving a big and urgent problem that people with decision authority are motivated to solve. That gauntlet that anybody has to go through to get something adopted in a healthcare system is so long and cumbersome. You need super motivated stakeholders to move it through that process. And they're only going to do that for something that's a huge pain point. So unfortunately, if you're fourth or fifth on the list of problems they want to solve, they're probably not going to fist pound and go through all that pain for your solution. So that's really the very first thing, nailing that problem statement. And I think you guys have touched on it. It's, doing all that customer discovery, understanding the context and the pain, and, that you're trying to solve, who you're trying to solve it for, who gets the return investment on solving that, because a lot of times the user and the buyer are two different constituents. But understanding those really is critical. So many times we have founders who just they almost skip past the problem statement to get to their solution because they're so enamored with what they've built that, you're much better off spending more time convincing us that this is a problem that needs to be solved than you are that your solution solves a problem that we're not convinced needs to be solved. Because you'll get another meeting if we think you're solving the right problem.
Yeah. Hirsch, do you have a question? Or if you don't, could you mute your mic?
And by the way, on these topics, again, at dreamit.com/dose, my partners and I have put together these short 5-minute videos on these topics. And I literally did a Dreamit dose that's called the most important part of your pitch deck. And it's all about the right way to present your problem statement.
Great. Melinda Chu, I'm going to just call on folks because I want to know who you are and what's up. So Melinda, can you tell us who you are?
Hi, Melinda Chu, doctor with 12 years clinical research experience. I'm working on a digital health startup called Venja Health, which is connected health tracking for cancer patients. Nice to meet everyone.
Good.
Nice to meet you.
So based on what you heard, what are your thoughts? I mean, just give us a little bit about your experience and your journey so far as a physician entrepreneur.
I think something that I'm working on is making the pitch more of a pitch rather than an academic presentation. So there's distinction, also figuring out, like he was saying, about the users and the buyers. I think that's an important distinction. Right.
And I think, we could have a very long conversation about how to pitch your idea, and there's a gazillion resources on the internet. But fundamentally, I think most of us agree the idea is to tell a story. It's not to tell about the features of your gadget. It's not to tell about, what it does and how it works and all that other stuff. You basically have to tell a story. And that really takes some effort and some talent, and in some instances, coaching. So if I were to leave you with a headline, it would be that. And again, Adam is an expert in this. There's several people on this panel that are experts. Focus on telling a story. Nobody really cares about your solution at this point. They just care about the problem and why they should care. So appeal to the heart, not the head. People buy emotionally, justify rationally. Appeal to their emotions, not to their head. So thanks for doing that. Sri, do you have a comment or a question?
Yes, Arlen. Actually, it's for you, Adam, and Keita. Adam actually mentioned the problem statement. Say, for example, you are at the cutting edge area of something, for example, like COVID, and you have a new vaccine that you're working on. Information about COVID is evolving all the time. And you have this particular problem statement that's based on the information that you have available at that time. But by the time you cobble all of that together and get your problem statement and maybe a potential solution to it, the problem fundamentally has changed because new information has come in. We know more about COVID, for example. How do you budget for that? And then how do you handle that new information with still appearing to be credible about what it is that you're trying to sell or build or market? How do you handle that?
I'll turn it over. Adam, you want to answer that first, and then Kasia, then I can give you my view.
So my view is that
Okay.
your problem statement must be accurate and current. So I know that with COVID, the science moves very fast, and yet we need to be able to have a current problem statement that is rooted in current science. So I don't know,
Adam?
it just has to be done.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would help, Shri, to answer that question if you would finish this sentence for me, because I think I know what you're asking, but I want to make sure. So finish the sentence, which is the problem we solve is.
Sri, you want to answer that?
Yeah, unmute Sri.
You're muted.
Sorry, I'm thinking about it because it is fundamentally a hypothetical. Because what COVID is, it's called the grand challenge, which is that it's got no boundaries. So I don't know exactly what it is that I'm trying to solve at this point. But I just wanted to use the example of COVID as something that's new, where every day there's some new information about it. How do you handle that problem statement was where I was actually trying to go. So I don't know if I have an exact answer to what Adam
Yeah.
just asked. But my point was, when you have an evolving problem, and information is new and new research, for example, is coming in every day, you go in with what you think is a solution to the state of the art thing at this point. But when that changes, how do you cope with that? How do you deal with that? And then how do you invest? How do you convince people to buy in terms of what it is that you're doing, even if you have that evolving problem statement? So I was kind of going there with that.
Yeah. So my 2 cents on this is, so if the problem, there are various aspects to every problem. So one way of so there's COVID. Well, there's a million different aspects to COVID: treatment, diagnosis, prevention, rehabilitation. So one way to look at this is to do a value factor analysis or a value chain analysis. So if you just take one, for example, how do we get more people to get vaccinated? So that's one part of the COVID problem. And secondly, it's still an unmet need. 37 million people in the United States haven't been vaccinated. So that's not going away. It's unlikely to go away, and COVID is likely to stay. So if your problem is, we can get more people, we want to, I want to get more people vaccinated. Well, look at the value chain of how that works, whether it's from the initiation of the vaccine, maybe a pill, maybe an at-home dose, maybe a needleless injection, you name it. And then walk through the whole value chain from inception to delivery in the arm. And where can you make that process better? You don't have to boil the whole ocean. You just have to address an unmet market need. Now I say just, you got what I mean. It's not easy, but that's kind of the point. Zachary, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. I think this is a little bit of a tougher one to try and frame as well. So I'm just trying to understand if companies are able to sell a vision that they see a future need or a future problem, but it may not be a problem that's realized right now. So the 2 examples I could think of were the virtual reality training for surgery and then telehealth.
Right.
They both seem to have more uptake after problems that happen. So
Right.
COVID for telehealth, and then the success of the Oculus and virtual reality through Facebook and Meta. So
Right.
how those 2 problems weren't as urgent at the time of the initial ideation, but are companies like that able to find funding, and how?
Sure. So 2 points, and then the others can chime in. One, life is timing. Just because you don't scale or you don't get traction doesn't mean it was a terrible idea. It means there's no idea, there's nothing more valuable than an idea whose time has come. Well, maybe your time hasn't come, and we can get into a whole discussion about, well, what does that mean? it fundamentally means the ecosystem is not ready to accept it. Okay? Electric cars. Electric cars are only beginning to scale once you create the grid infrastructure. Television preceded the network by 7 to 10 years. The television was invented, but it didn't scale because there was no network. It was only when CBS created the network that it was able to scale. So number one, you have to have the right ground, fertile ground for the seed to grow. Number two, there's a lot to be said by not being the first to market and instead being the fast follower. And research indicates that, in fact, fast followers are frequently more successful than first to market. Why? Because you learn on somebody else's nickel.
Mhm.
They make all the mistakes. They spend all the money. They break their back trying to get innovators and early adopters and new customers, when in fact, you let them make all the mistakes and then you follow up as a fast follower. And the research indicates that you're actually going to be more successful doing that. So this first to market, never been done before, is really an entrepreneurial myth. Does that answer?
I had a professor in college, entrepreneurial studies professor in college, who used to say, pioneers are the guys with the arrows in their backs. So to your point, Arlen.
Yeah, it's
Right.
an important point. Also, the first to market usually develops the market, right? Convinces everyone that it's needed, and then the second comes with a better solution
Right.
to a market that is already there.
And that gets to the point of where do you play? If you decide to play in a new market category, that is going to cost you a lot of money and a lot of heartburn. So you really need to think carefully about, but the upside is enormous if you're successful. So it really has to do with the risk return. We have time for one more question, if anybody has one. Well, if not, then go ahead.
Yeah, Arlen, I had one. In the chat, there was something about VAST, viable, automatic, scalable, and I believe the
Time sensitive.
So
Right.
what's the automatic? What does the automatic
Right.
refer to?
So viable means you make money doing it. Automatic means you can't be, as a CEO or as a team building a product, you basically have to rapidly transfer from working in the company to working on the company. Do you get what I mean? So when you start this company, your picture is in every part of the org chart. You're the CEO, you're the COO, you're the chief marketing officer, you're everything. And this is the entrepreneur e-myth, that you have to, as quickly as possible, make yourself obsolete. You have to find people to put in those boxes that can do the work so that you can be more strategic instead of hands-on, because you're just not going to be able to scale. You can't do it. There's just too many people. And typically the number is, if you have annual recurrent revenue of less than $2 million, or you have less than 10 employees, you sort of can do it yourself. But once you get beyond that, you can't do it yourself. You're not going to be able to scale because you don't have the right expertise and people to do it. So that's what I mean by automatic. You have to have the systems in place that are replicable and that are semi-automatic and almost routine to scale this thing. You can't one-off this when you want to scale it.
Thanks, Arlen.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So Kasia, thank you very much. Adam, thanks for your comments and everybody else's comments. I hope you enjoyed this. If we're gonna record this, we're gonna put it up on the SoPE YouTube channel. So go to SoPE video. You can just Google that on YouTube, subscribe. And then once we get this thing up, you can download it to your heart's content. Our next go to soapnet.org/events for our next event, which is actually going to be sponsored by the Utah chapter, and that's going to be how to find a job in digital health. So thanks for your interest, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Great discussion.